Welcome to probably, in my opinion anyway, the most exciting episode or next few episodes of this entire series. This is really the culmination of years of research and study, both in documented research and the study of what's in this forest, Gilbert Hills State Forest in Foxboro, Massachusetts. The last 3 episodes have been laying some foundation for what we want to do here, which is to decode the anatomy of an ancient native ritual in a site made up of multiple structures stretching over hundreds of yards. And it's going to be the research that we're basing this on that will help us. That is research supplied by the most prolific researcher of stone structures in New England in many years, and that is Mary Gage. Mary Gage wrote a book on a site in Salem, New Hampshire, referred to as America's Stonehenge, and that book is called America's Stonehenge Deciphered. Also, an article on a site in Groton, Connecticut, south of here, called Gunjiwamp. And it's those 2 pieces of work that we can draw from to create the analogies to what's going on here and provide some possible explanation. In Mary's work, she lays out the procession that occurred in these sites. And they may have changed over time, structures may have changed, but the processional flow still exists. And it starts with what's called preparation ceremony. And we will unfold this as we go through the site. We'll go structure by structure, and I'll explain it as we go along. But to start with, the likely ceremony that occurred here is one that involves the sun either heading to the upper world as the seasons get warmer, or in the minds of the ancient natives here, into the underworld as the seasons got colder. In the last episode, we talked about the foundational element of what Native Americans believed in, and they believed that they weren't passive observers worshiping a deity. They were part of nature. They were part of the universe, and the role they had to play was maintaining balance. Balance is going to be very important here, very important concept throughout. And it was their active participation that helped balance in their mind the natural flow of both what we see here and their spirit world. So, with that, there are essentially 4 types of spirits in a ceremony like this. A host spirit, we'll get to that. A guest spirit, which I will say is the sun spirit here. Helper spirits, which naturally the serpent effigy here, the 200-foot serpent effigy, at which this is the head, would be one of those helper spirits. Potentially the moon spirit, as we found in Gunjiwamp, also could be in play here. But water spirits were super important, and they had a number of different spirits for different types of water: rainwater, spring water, flowing water, still water. The ceremonies bringing those helper spirits in were called preparation ceremonies. So at the front end of this site, we would expect to find the area for preparation ceremonies for those spirits. I did not find what Mary Gage was looking for, or what Mary Gage found in Stonehenge of Americas and Gunjiwamp, which was a drain and a basin for the use of calling forth the water spirits. So I spent a lot of time out here looking for that, because it has to be here if there's going to be any consistency. Now, I followed the line of the snake effigy over this little ridge behind where you are viewing and into the body of water. I found nothing. However, as is the case in many times in this forest, I have followed the lines implied by the structures, and well, let's go on a little walk in this direction and see what we can find. Come on, Tom. Well, we are about 45 yards from the line of sight that headstone of the snake effigy implies, and as is laid out in the Gunjiwamp article, there was a rough hewn basin with a drain carved out of rock. And here we are. There's one right here. And it's discoveries like this that I think are amazing out here, where one might think they're coincidence, they're just stones sitting around. But this is where a very important Native American ancient ceremony ritual started. It started with this basin and a shaman standing right here, calling forth the spirits, starting with the water spirit. And it started right here with a shaman standing here, a bowl of water in his or her hands, and starting the ceremony by pouring that water into the basin and having it flow right down the drain, just like we've seen at both America's Stonehenge and at Gunjewamp. Here, whichever water spirit was being called forth, as we face a body of water just off into the distance, the ceremony started. And the procession started from this preparatory site. So from here the procession started, and I'm going to estimate that it moved to the head of the snake effigy and on up that stone row. If you've seen the other episodes, you know that that stone row points directly over a ridge to the entrance of a cave, which we will proceed to. But along the way, there's one very important feature in that snake effigy that embodies the concept, as Mary Gage has written, which is balance. So let's go find the balance point of a 200-foot snake effigy. I'll tell. So back here at the snake effigy, the head is down there, the body stone row starts to come up the rise here. So as we walk up what would likely have been the path of the procession on this side of the stone wall, which I'll get to in a minute, I just want to talk a little bit more about the spirits that are involved in the ritual concept. With the sun spirit, it clearly changes with the seasons, and the natives felt that it was important to assist in making sure it got where it was supposed to go. Those helper spirits had to be called up as well, and with them would be the water spirit, a animal effigy, or animal spirit, I should say, that really gives a key clue as to which time of year the ceremony was occurring. At Gunjewamp, there were 28 stones in 2 different rows, and in one of the stones, both times, there was a bird effigy, or a bird petroglyph. Birds having the capability to fly from the middle world, where we are, to the upper world. Likely that part of the ceremony was for the sun coming out in the spring or summer from its trip to the underworld. Here we've got a serpent effigy, which implies now the ritual that was conducted here was done when sending the sun into the underworld for the winter. In the cases of Gunjewamp, those 28 stones in the row, of which the bird petroglyph was part, happens to be consistent with the 28 days between the lunar cycle. So as Mary Gage wrote on Gunjewamp, the moon spirit was likely part of the ceremony. Here, in that middle part of the snake effigy, so keeping that in mind regarding the moon spirit being involved in their minds, we come to the center point of a 200-foot snake effigy stone row that continues up and points toward the mouth of a cave we'll get to next. But this structure is not accidental, right? Think about Mary Gage's view of the balance. Right in the center, you've got 2 embedded boulders. They're the only big embedded boulders in the stone row. And the center point right here between those 2 stone embedded boulders is the middle of the stone wall. Now, why I believe this implies the moon spirit is if one were to stand here 70 degrees facing between me and you to the horizon is where the moon would rise on several days of the year. Exactly. Now I know there's a difference between magnetic azimuths and true azimuths. We can get to that in another video, but nonetheless, directly out from this point, if someone was standing here, they would see the moon rise several times a year. So my hypothesis is the procession went from the water ceremony and the basin up this stone wall, stood here, and invoked some other type of spirit, likely the moon spirit. However, there are numbers of planets that rise at this point as well. Could have been that, but it being consistent with and relying on the Mary Gage research, in all likelihood it was the moon. So we've now invoked a serpent spirit, water spirits, and moon spirit. Let's continue on and see what waits us in the cave. As we proceed up the remainder of the stone row, making up the serpent effigy, I'll make the point that the direction this points will take us up that hill, and as we go over that rise and back down, what we will find is exactly where that procession would have continued on had it gone from the end of the snake effigy into the cave. Let's see where that leads us. We come down over the rise, the snake effigy behind us, and this is exactly where it points. Let's check this out. The procession would have headed right down this direction. Up here, you can almost make out some stones that might have lined this. Takes us to this boulder here, which one can go left or right. Previously, in the prior episodes laying out the site, I've gone left. Today I'll go right. Now there may have been a reason for 2 paths here. In the work Mary Gage did, she discussed the processions and the ceremonies being parallel in nature between lay people who participated and the shaman. I'm not going down the separation between those two necessarily. That may be a little bit more advanced than I have the capability for, but I just wanted to bring that up. And here we are at the cave. So let's bring the camera around and zoom in and get some more detail here. First, as we enter the cave to the right here, there's an opening where you can see some rocks have been placed. There's a little rock up there as well. I think we're going to see later in the ceremony open spaces in something like this were very often blocked up. Notwithstanding the mosquitoes there, we've got another open space up here, also blocked up with stones. Now right here, if this cave were being used as a portal, and I'll cut to the research on portals here now, then this certainly would have been a candidate for that. So let's take a look at the portal research. In the image you see here, particularly the one on the left, figure 4, is one particular type of portal that Mary Gage and her team have documented. It tends to be a recessed space like the one we're seeing in the cave. We'll see another one in a enclosure as we go along. However, at Stonehenge of the Americas, they believe they documented over a dozen style of portals. So let's just talk about portals in general. If I'm taking a look at spirit portals here in Mary Gage's book, portals are entry and exit features for spirits. They are essentially doorways. Portals were used by spirits to travel from the upper world and the underworld onto a site, from one area onto a site to another area, from the exterior of a structure to its interior, and through interior portals to move from one room to another side of the structure. Some portals were designed to function with the spirit's visible form. Others were designed to function with the spirit's invisible form. That refers to, say, the sun spirit and light that could be visible at sunrise to an observer versus invisible spirits such as we'll find the underworld spirit. In general, portals and spirits were interchangeable, meaning any style of portal could be used by any spirit. In practice, each style of portal often reflected the type of usage that they were created or built for. Okay, as we exit the cave, I want to point out a couple more things before we wrap up this episode here about halfway through the ceremony. Stones right around here line this area. They come down to this spot here, which I didn't mention on the LiDAR tour originally, but this could be considered a cave. I would also consider that more of a chamber, not quite big enough for a person to get into, but certainly heading back up into the cliffside here. This area here has stones around it as well. And so what I would conclude, possibly not only would this place have been used as a portal in the ceremonies, but possibly an enclosure as well. So we've discussed the portals. An enclosure is very important in these ceremonies in that either shaman or lay people, depending on the flow, would have used an enclosure to essentially commune with the spirits they believed they were working with, and possibly bringing the spirits, multiple spirits, together within an enclosure for a particular purpose. So what we could have had here between these two caves, or a cave and a chamber, is a place where spirits were called forth. Whether we are talking about now the underworld spirit, which would have been the host spirit, I think the sun spirit being called forth is a different spot, but for the storyline, I would say the shaman had gathered up by the time he or she got here their water spirits, their serpent spirit, and their moon spirit, and possibly called forth from this place the underworld spirit. At this point, I want to bring in an image from page 41 of America's Stonehenge Deciphered, because while conceptually much of what we are doing is comparing this site to the documented sites in Mary Gage's publication, some are much closer on point than others. And taking a look at the dual cave with the vertical cliff above it, as we just saw in our video, you can see here in figure 18 on page 41, the discussion at Stonehenge of America. The underworld spirit was a spirit within the underworld, underground. The discovery of two caves, of which one was tall enough for people to walk inside, allowed people to physically enter the underworld and hence hold a ceremony with the underworld spirit. The smaller cave to the right of the larger cave may have served more of a niche. Niches, when not accompanied by other features, such as we'll see in the next video, a split stone cairn, is an area for an offering to entice spirits to come forth. So this is very close to what we're seeing here at the Snake Cave site in Foxboro, Massachusetts, to figure 18 from. Okay, that's going to wrap up this episode. We obviously have a lot more work to do, but hopefully you can see how the layout of these structures and natural features play into the concept, as Mary Gage has set forth, that spirits were called forth in preparation ceremonies. The entire ritual would have been a procession leading up to, in all likelihood, an engagement between the sun spirit and the underworld spirit. We imply the underworld spirit because of the serpent effigy. The moon spirit can actually go both ways because that operates in both realms, the upper world and the lower world. So we can begin to conclude that this was a fall or early winter ceremony where the native ritual was intended to guide the sun spirit into the underworld for the winter. As we go along, we're going to be able to pinpoint exactly what day of the year that occurred. So, as always, thanks for watching. Until next time.